Hello and a warm welcome to the Open Treasury podcast, your go-to source for the latest news and analysis in corporate cash and treasury management. This show is brought to you by CTMfile.com and the Treasury News Network, where treasury professionals learn and share the information that matters most. I am Pushpendra Mehta, and my guest for today is Craig Jeffery, Managing Partner and Strategic Treasurer. Welcome back to the Open Treasury podcast, Craig.
Good to be here, Push.
This week's list of important articles up for discussion is more than usual. We'll touch on the indirect payment impacts of the Russia-Ukraine war, the volatility in digital currency, and the payment story driven by Mastercard's plan to allow consumers to smile at checkout or wave their hands to pay. You can find these articles in the show notes from this podcast or by looking them up on CTMfile.com. Craig, let's get started. The first story of the day that I would like to discuss with you is about the European Commission's announcement of a Euro 300 billion plan to wean the continent of dependency on Russian gas. Russia supplies 40% of European Union's natural gas and 27% of its imported oil. The European Union sends the country roughly 400 billion euros a year in return. And the EU 300 billion Escape Russia gas plan aims to rapidly find alternative sources of energy while ramping up energy savings and renewables. Given that the EU countries are still struggling to agree sanctions on Russian oil as Hungary and other landlocked countries oppose the move and concerns about the costs of switching to alternative sources, do you think European Union will get independent of Russian fossil fuels as quickly as they'd like to believe? And what would you be observing keenly in this European Union plan to stop using Russian gas?
Push, I can comment on the effort and the money put behind this effort to disconnect from Russian gas. I think it's a pretty ambitious plan. There's obviously a huge reliance on Russian energy. Putting 300 billion euros into this is quite significant. A huge chunk of that's going into renewables. That takes time to spin up. And it's not always as consistent as some other fuel sources, yet it can reduce the amount of gas that they have. The other expansion on pulling in more LNG or liquefied natural gas to help with that provides another way of weaning on this. I don't know if I know what their plan is for how quickly they can get off of liquid natural gas, but they can't do it soon enough. And it's, with the war and their plans, it's having a significant impact. So this is a significant investment. 300 billion euros is a significant investment to move in this direction. How does a treasury professional think about this? I mean, this really falls in the area of commodity, the ongoing issue of how will countries deal with ongoing energy demands, dislocations or attempted dislocations in the energy supply. So I think it continues to bring to attention or bring to the forefront the issue of managing both supply chain, energy, commodity prices. This impacts many, many companies directly and almost every company indirectly through its ripple effect, through the cost of commodities that, layering in should have some carry-on force to inflation. So it creates volatility for most organizations at different levels. So just a continued focus on risk management is always a good reminder.
It's interesting that you mentioned risk management being a great reminder, because the second story of the day that caught our attention is about how Italy's UniCredit and Germany's Commerzbank were interested in a potential merger and had planned a meeting to start talks before abandoning the idea due to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, as reported in the Financial Times. Craig, why do you think the deal was called out? Is it because it carried high execution risks, given that there is fragmentation and low profitability in the German banking market? Or is it because of economic uncertainty and geopolitical risks or something else?
I'm sure all those have some factor. I mean, what was stated had to do with the exposure to Russia and dealing with that. I mean, that shift was dramatic, and you want to have things buttoned down when you're going through acquisitions, either acquiring or being acquired. And when something comes up like this and you have significant exposure to Russia, that's a challenge. I mean, UniCredit is trying to divest of what's going on with Russia. And so it seems that clearing that off the table first will allow things to proceed. But this is, these are some of the indirect impacts of the war, the fuel, and then also things like these potential mergers or acquisitions on the banking front all are some type of fallout directly or indirectly from Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
From Russia's invasion of Ukraine to digital currency volatility, the third story pertains to the South African Reserve Bank Deputy Governor saying that the digital rand is a few years away and that the South African Central Bank digital currency could cut the high cost of cross-border payments for banks. However, regulation of crypto assets is in the offing and might come into force in the first half of 2023. The South African Central Bank believes that a proper crypto regulation environment is required to prevent theft, money laundering, and undermining of monetary policy. In Australia, one of the big four Australian banks, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, has shelved its plans to offer cryptocurrencies to its customers through their banking app amid the widespread volatility in the crypto market. Craig, why are commercial banks and central banks around the world trying to regulate crypto assets? Is it because of the volatility factor, or are there security and privacy concerns? What do you think is going on?
Why is there regulation? Why is there concern? And why is there interest? It's sort of the moth to a flame. There's attraction to it, and there's a danger of coming too close. I know we're getting towards the summer months in the northern hemisphere. That may be a good image for our minds, but the issue of having transactions value, whether it's a store of value used for transactions, if it's not regulated in some manner or reported, there's concerns on the terrorism front or the crime front. Certainly there's a tax follow-on from that. Businesses that are trading or activity that's trading that's not taxed is considered a loss from the government perspective. So the concerns on the terrorism side is massive. And so that's always a key item in our view of why regulation is put forth that way, to handle those terrorism, crime, and taxation. Those tend to go fairly close together. Those are key issues. You also asked about, is it related to volatility or security? I'm sure there's some security component to it as well, not wanting people to get ripped off. There's certainly a lot of large losses that have occurred due to the theft of cryptocurrencies or exchanges, things that have happened. And I'm sure there's some concerns there, but I think it's more on the terrorism, crime, and tax front. That's where the concern is about getting burned. But there's also this caution, and everyone's cautious about it. They're all moving forward with something. They're cautious about it. They're trying to find the right balance between new forms of currency and value being relevant and providing a controlled framework. And so I think that's the challenge. So we see people putting things on hold because of volatility. I think that was part of your question. So the Commonwealth Bank of Australia is an example of probably due to volatility and concerns. Is it the right thing to do? Is this the right timing? And they're certainly a little more cautious on that. So this positivity and hesitation are two sides of that coin that central banks, other banks are looking at. I don't think anybody wants to be left out. There's a fear of missing out, and there's a fear of being burned, whether it's a central bank or a commercial bank.
Craig, the fourth story for discussion is about payments giant Mastercard revealing that they will soon allow consumers to smile at checkout or wave their hands to pay. Mastercard has announced that it will soon launch a new biometric checkout program that will enable shoppers to scan their faces with the retailer's smartphone app to match their portrait with a bank card stored on file to approve payments and unlock devices. Mastercard's testing of biometric systems has commenced for physical stores using facial recognition instead of contactless cards, smartphones, or PINs. Craig, what makes biometric facial technology such an attractive proposition? Is it the speed and ease of biometric checks, or is it that the market for contactless biometrics is expected to reach $18.6 billion by 2026. So is it security and fraud prevention also which is at play here?
I think the primary one is the convenience. Something I have, something I know to transact a business, or that provides some level of security. And if it's my face, it's hard to steal my face. I mean, there's ways of spoofing things, but this idea of it just streamlines the process. It's like on some of the major interstates or highways in the US, they have these transponders you stick in your car, and you don't have to stop to pay a toll. You just go, it just recognizes your car has moved through either from the plate or from a transponder, pulls the money out of your account, bills you, and you don't have to slow down. And so the pain of the money going out of your account is still there, but the pain of stopping, waiting, accelerating, all those delays are removed. So the more we remove that type of friction of payment, the more we're just onto the transaction. And it's kind of hard to say. It's really, painful to smile. You can have a smile with you. You have your biometrics with you in the normal course of business. So I think this is helpful. I think of years ago when they passed out those little chips. You could stick these chips on your keychain when you used to carry keys, right? You could go to the fast food place and you beep it through and it takes it out just like it was a credit card, but it's contactless. It was quick. And that was, I don't know how many years ago, it was 15 or 20. And now it's on your phone. It's something you have with you, but you should have your face with you. You should have your biometrics. And we see that going through the airport. It just makes it easier. It's like, okay, we can go through Clear or, some of the cross-border things where they store you give up some information about your biometrics, but it confirms very quickly who you are. They can still ask you questions, but now you've gone through this whole someone eyeballing you. You've already passed that information. So we've moved away from the password or passcode environment in some of these two biometrics. That's quite a bit easier. And it's kind of like that perhaps at home. You'd have physical keys to get into your home, and now you might have those smart pads where you can change the code. You can make codes available for a certain time if someone's coming in to do some work. Whether you have your biometrics or you punch in a particular code, now you're not carrying this giant thing of keys around with you. You just made life easier in many, many regards. So I think that's probably the biggest issue there. And I've completely forgotten what your other question was.
Do you think it's also being increasingly adopted because of security, privacy, and or fraud prevention concerns?
I don't know. I mean, you give up a little bit more data about yourself for the convenience. I think a lot of people are willing to do that.
And do you think corporates in the future will adopt this as well? Biometric facial technology for employees or for more internal, external, perhaps security, some other issues around that?
Yes. I mean, I certainly think so. Accessing a building, how do we prevent access? Physical keys, swipe cards, and then it could be fingerprint scans. You see that in some locations where it's biometric. You can't pass your finger onto someone else. You can pass your access card onto someone else. That's going to continue to grow and dominate how we access and move about.
Interesting times we live in, Craig. So, Craig, let me ask you finally, what is your choice for the biggest or most important story of the past week and why?
Push, I'm going to go with the EU's 300 billion euro plan to escape Russian gas. And while my favorite story was about the smiling of biometric facial, because it's a little more lighthearted than some of the heavy stuff there, I think that's really significant. So necessity is the mother of invention, but necessity here is spurring more renewables and natural gas, some other methods of finding alternative sources. So I think that's quite interesting from a conversion perspective. And also people looking at trading partners, the risk with certain trading partners. There's been a significant realization of those risks, particularly among a lot of our European friends.
Interesting. And I would concur with you because not just because of the fact that European Union sends Russia roughly 400 billion euros a year in return for its gas and imported oil, but also the fact that this may be the defining moment or the point of inflection where things change and they realize that countries like Qatar, for example, have offered to help them. And we've done a story on that as well. So this is certainly going to be a news worth watching and observing very, very keenly. So I'd agree with you. I would go with the same story as it's the most important for the week. Thank you for joining us on this edition of Open Treasury. to both you, Craig, and our fellow audience. Please subscribe and look in the show notes for the article links. Thank you.
This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.